Happy Friday and welcome back to the game on Pax8 Live, the show where we discuss all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. And oh boy, have there been some cybersecurity shenanigans as of late. We'll get to that here in just a minute, but while you're here, make sure you like, subscribe, share all the fun stuff that boosts our little algorithmic equation for us. And with that, let's jump right into the news with Matt.
All right. Well,
What's up, Matt?
this is the first time I've been back without my beard, right? Like legit.
Yeah.
So
It's coming in quick though.
pretty,
It's
pretty decently.
I dig it.
I like to say the good Lord has a sense of humor, Dom, in the sense that I've always got one eye that points at a wall, no matter what I'm doing. So at least I have a fast growing beard, right? There has to be like an attribute rollout at some point.
Trying to even it out for you, you know?
Yeah. Got great charisma, kind of stupid, all those great, trait balances. But let's get into the news today. So I want to just basically make some people aware, if you're a user of Acer laptops or if your customers are using Acer as one of their primary go-to-market strategies, which is probably not all that high. There was a bug found in the code. It's been released as a new CVE that's tagged in this article, that's saying essentially they could disable or inject maybe no trusted components into the secure boot process, right? So the ability to disable or circumvent the secure boot process. Dom, what's the secure boot process and why does this matter to an MSP?
You make me talk about cryptography again. So secure boot takes the concept of code signing, right, which is probably the most important thing when it comes to releasing applications for any operating system. And it brings it to the bootloader and the UEFI, the UEFI. And I totally forgot what that acronym means, but it's, new age BIOS. But anyways, it basically signs that bootloader so that your UEFI can validate that that is indeed the correct bootloader. And more importantly, especially in the case of Windows 11, is where they really have mastered this. Once the bootloader hands off to Windows, Windows uses that cryptographic signature to verify. So if I compromise that in some way and compromise the bootloader and convince Windows to trust it, I can now slip rootkits into your operating system and onto your chips and all that fun stuff.
Which is a very low level access, right? It means it's very, very privileged access if I'm starting up before the operating system. Or as
arguably the most, right?
Like, yeah. And
unless you figure out a way to compromise post.
Yeah, right. UEFI or UEFI stands for Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, and it's more. You're correct.
Did you just Google that?
More. I did. I'm not going to lie and say I knew it, but I did look it up for the purposes of honoring our agreement for these ladies.
Appreciate you. Yes.
So, but thanks for not letting me hard flex, Dom. That was very good to keep me honest. I really do appreciate that. Okay, so but the point is, in this article, they do say that there are Microsoft releases that have come out since then that they're going to be in those critical rollups. Keep an eye out for this one. You can also go get it directly from the Acer site.
I just want to point out too, real quick, this isn't a unique thing. It's happened to most manufacturers that offer in-band management. It's vPro is probably the most famous example of this. But it's a really powerful thing. You can do things like use your RMM to make sure UEFI settings are right. So don't panic. This is not Acer, dropping the ball per se. Obviously, a vulnerability is bad, but just know pay attention for these. These things will happen to pretty much anyone who has modern UEFI with in-band management.
For sure. All right. This next one's going to take you to Dom's favorite platform. In fact, I think Dom's username on this platform is OG TikTok, if I recall. But hackers are using, OG TikTok. I just made that up on the fly, too. It wasn't very good.
I like it.
I did. Thank you.
Still better than Teacup.
This is better than Teacup. God bless his heart. Is he still in prison? I would imagine.
I don't know.
But hackers are using a trending invisible challenge, right? Where essentially the filter makes it to where the human is covered. It's just their silhouette. But people are like, I really want to know what's underneath that. And so someone made a obfuscated tool to take away that filter that has been placed, which is probably not mathematically possible if we're really honest with ourselves on this. And in that filter removal process, they embedded malware. And I really wanted to bring this up, not as anything that's probably going to directly affect you, but this is going back to that social engineering and attacking people where they are. Oftentimes, security researcher tools like the ones I use may be poisoned on purpose to create those type of taking advantage of people looking for and using tools, which is what these people have done in this particular GitHub repo, is created an actual malicious application purporting to be something that helps you and a user use something. So, Dom, what can you do to protect yourself from this? How can someone protect themselves from injecting malicious things in public repos?
You could uninstall TikTok, but shorting that, if you're a TikTok user and you enjoy using TikTok, I'm gonna be really honest here. Don't be a weirdo. Like this also happened. There was a trend a while back with the whole red light thing in the silhouettes, and people
Yep,
realized
yep.
if you took that video and modified the color bands, the red light goes away, and whatever you may have been doing behind said red light is clearly visible. This is like the original story of the internet. Like what kind of websites have always been the highest potential for nefarious code, right? So I don't know. My advice would be don't do this. Maybe like I don't go installing random stuff and you'll be fine. I think um, just looking at this too, there's some things that stand out here, like maybe the GitHub username and some other things that are maybe should be like, well, not the member of the community I want to be downloading code from. But anyways, yeah, seriously in general, just don't go looking for random tools to do very specific nefarious things because that's a great target.
Yeah. And I would then add on to that if you are doing that because you're learning to do red teaming operations, you're trying to demonstrate things, do it in a safe way. Do it with accounts that don't mind if they're compromised. Do it in a sandbox as much as possible. Create some layers of protection and separation. So it does come into this same kind of overall security theme of if you're handling more sensitive things or if you're handling more risky things, handle them in ways that account for that risk. Right? If you're hauling nitroglycerin, you might want good shocks at some point, right? And some of those kind of things come into play. So I think this is one of those examples of if you are going to take that risk, you need to understand it. And most of these people do not, right? They're just
Really quick tip on that
ship.
too. So you can now do Kali Linux on Whistle or Windows subsystem for Linux. That is not a sandbox. That is running on
That's
your
correct.
machine. It is so that's not isolation. So for Windows 11, Windows Sandbox is a feature built in. You can install that through add features. It's actually pretty cool. I use it for just basic like see where this phishing link goes type work. So it's a really quick way to get a sandbox. But another great way to do that is to go to your the DigitalOceans and those kind of cheap, easy cloud providers of the world. Stand yourself up a Kali box. But I just wanted to point out, don't go using Whistle for these types of
Yeah.
activities because it has
Which is
access right
Windows
into Windows.
subsystem for Linux.
I
For
said it. I
everybody
said it
listening,
before. Yeah,
WSL. Oh, did you? I'm so sorry. I'll
yeah,
take back
I
my
did.
statement. We can just cut that out on the cutting room
Don't be
floor.
stealing my points. Yeah.
Oh wait, this is live. That's not how this works, is it? It's okay. Free points for Dom. I apologize, and penalty points for you as well in that one. All right, this brings us to our last article, which I think we can get down the road a lot on. So Dom, we're gonna kick this off. Everybody's talked about this elephant in the room for about 2 weeks now, a week and a half now since the second. But Rackspace Cloud Office suffers security breach, and more than just that, they suffered the entire system was compromised and shut down. There is no access to mail. There's no access to previous mail. There's only you sitting there having your client's emails bounce back to them and say non-existent domain or non-existent handler or timed out in 48 hours or right. And so you have this horrible experience playing out. Don, let's try to look at this from a what happened and then lessons learned perspective. And I'd like to spend the next 5 minutes kind of on that about this news article. But kick it off for us, buddy. What happened here?
Well, I first ran into this on Mastodon and I was cruising around and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Rackspace is a big provider. I've been following it since. So this was like not long after it went down. And ironically, everyone but Rackspace has been talking about this, which is blowing my mind. So I want to say the first lesson here is please be transparent. It does not take, and I'm taking the gloves off a little bit because it's been 6 days and it hasn't improved. So I always come at these from a place of empathy and know that things happen. 6 days have gone by, so I'm taking the gloves
And
off.
I
just
also
a
want to
little bit.
state that we want to be empathetic about the victims of this
Yes,
and
I
the
am.
people
I
that
am.
are there.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be re-victimizing. It may sound like there's things that we're going to talk about that are lessons learned, but they're definitely meant to be just like when you're picking your kid up after the first time he wrecked his motocross bike and saying, what did we learn in that turn? That we're hoping to bring this in the spirit of. So just wanted to put that preface on there. Go ahead, Dom.
Yeah. It's been handled horribly, right? It doesn't take 24 hours to figure out that what happened to you is ransomware. It just doesn't. And it took them 24 hours to say
Maybe the
that.
readme.txt would be the first indication, like that pops up on the screen that says
The
you've been ransomed.
Bitcoin
That'd be my
addresses.
first go-to as when
Yeah,
that
yeah.
becomes evident. Yeah.
So I want to say, like, if this is going to happen to providers, but they've got to come out and they've got to be transparent. But let's dive
And
into
humble.
some other things. Yeah, and humble. The article that was we were citing, there was from a researcher named Kevin Beaumont, and his website is doublepulsar.com. Link will be down there. But he immediately did some digging, and he got on Shodan, which is one of my favorite tools on the planet, and pulled up one of their Exchange servers and found a snapshot from not long before it went down. And the Exchange build is 15.0.1497. It doesn't matter. You can read the article. Point is
which is
if
subject
that
to
build
proxy
number is
shell.
accurate, if that build number is accurate, which tends to be the case because it comes from headers, that's August patch level, right? So Proxy Not Shell was patched in the November release, right?
Yep.
So we're close, but they're in August, so it's a kind of moot at that point. So lesson 2, please patch. Like, these critical vulnerabilities are going to come out. It's been a real tough few years for Exchange Server in particular. You really, really need to be patching, right? And Kevin does a great job in this article going through how these remediations that come out aren't going to cover you, particularly if you don't have anything at the edge like a WAF. You need to patch. That's the only thing you should be doing.
Well, and that's my call out on this too, Dom. I mean, this is maybe a little nitpicky, and it's certainly kind of hindsight's perfect, right? But if you're a company that is now hosting something in the cloud for somebody that you know is not protectable easily right now, that's one of the big challenges with Exchange and hosting Exchange yourself, is you have to do a lot of things to protect, including some of these things like proxy logon, not shell, those things that are all very similar. A WAF would have been a perfect way to be fast and flexible in the interim of being able to patch. It's very hard to build up enough Exchange infrastructure to patch very well at scale and do that, but it is easier for them to put in a WAF rule to stem the flood as they then go through that process, right? And I think that's one of the things where, to my middle theory, we're seeing this escalatory maturity where people will start saying, no, you're not adding any value. You have to be managing a WAF. You have to have a Cloudflare front end or something, to your point. But anyways, a little tangential. One of the other takeaways that I had on this too is that, often we have these companies that are making a lot of profit, and especially in this kind of case where it's probably a pretty decent moneymaker for them for a long time, comparative to the margins
about
they
30
might
million
make
a year is what they told their investors.
Couple
now,
bucks,
granted, they
right?
posted a $500 million loss last quarter, so they're not in super
fair
shape.
Touche. yeah, fair. Yeah, but I do think that following a security framework or having certain things. One example is we haven't seen them screaming about, in this last week and a half, a restoration process. There's been no discussion of the data needs to be restored. How long will that take? How much longer do we have to stack this up? None of that. And almost every other incident, when we see something like this, those companies are already talking about their restoration plans, or at least to some extent are talking about what their options are to reassure their customer base. We're not seeing any of that reassurance. And I think my conjecture is, and this is all conjecture, there is no backup. There is nothing functional, or the backup was destroyed by the same ransomware or whatever it may be. I believe we're going to find that we have a pretty serious loss of data that's going to occur. And this could be, with the 2 current class action suits that are in subject right now, this could be our watershed case. This could be one of those very interesting watershed precedent moments of real legal liability that translates into criminal, as well as very certain punitive damages for end consuming companies. I wouldn't say excited about this, Dom, but I'm excited for what these types of cases do.
And it's going to set the tone, right, in a big way, because you have to imagine there's at least one customer that's like a doctor's office, right? There's at least one customer that's in the finance space, right? And all of those are going to come into play. I think the DOJ is patiently sitting in the corner and waiting for the class list to come out as they figure out what they're going to come at. So, unfortunately for Rackspace, there's going to be a long, tough legal road ahead. But I do genuinely feel like some basic best practices were missed here, which is why we're going to talk about CIS controls today. So I'm excited. But what do we have
first?
Next? I think we have Robin.
I think we need to hear from our wonderful, fearless leader on compliance, Ms. Robin Harris. Oh, that graphic is so nice.
Well, what I want to talk to you about is doing a look back and a look forward. And you can do this annually. Like right now, we're coming to the end of the year. We want to look back, and then we want to look forward. You can do it quarterly. We do our quarterly OKRs. It's like, what did you plan to do this quarter, and what did you do this quarter? And in this context, I want to talk about your security posture and kind of like growing your organization to be security minded. What you want to do is look back on the security incidents you had. You want to look back on the challenges you had, things customers might have brought up or complained about, things employees might have come to you and revealed, like, this is really not working the way it should be. You want to look at what did you do great, and you want to kind of like expand your footprint in that space. And you want to come up with a plan to harvest all of that. Everything you want to harvest all of the treasures out of that information and create what's going to be going on for us in the next season. What are we up for in the next season? What can we do? What can we accomplish? What kind of benchmarks and milestones can we set for ourselves and come up with a real plan? Now I'm putting on my project manager hat, because that's what the discipline I came out of. Putting on my project manager hat, and you want to plan out some milestones that you want to accomplish on a quarterly basis. A quarterly time frame is enough for you to not overwhelm yourself, but you can make some good strides. 90 days and you don't have to drive yourself crazy, but you do have to be committed. You have to have a plan and you have to execute. And it doesn't have to be flawless. Plans are never flawless, but you want to do that on a security level. And you want to say, this year, let's improve our security savviness of our employees to make them more security aware. This year, let's bring in some new tools that will help us with access management or whatever. This year, let's do more vulnerability testing. This year, let's really revisit our security policies and take them up a level. This year, let's start thinking more globally. We're a global company now. We're not playing just in one region. So how do we wrap ourselves around this global conversation so that everybody's not doing their own thing, and then when it's time for audits, it's like, yeah, you don't want to do that. So you can really take what you've accomplished over the previous quarter, over the last year, and really turn that into a treasure map for yourself looking forward. And also take the opportunity to kind of like celebrate your journey, because if you're playing this game, you are making strides. And it's always easy to look at what you didn't do and what you didn't accomplish and how much work there needs to be done. But you need to take the time to celebrate what you accomplished, and how your people brought their A game to the table. And then when it's time to tell them, okay, now we're gonna, instead of running a little sprint, now we're gonna do this marathon. They won't be so reluctant because they'll feel appreciated and they can get excited about what's next. So that's my idea of your look back and your look forward.
That's 100%, right? I love doing after incident reviews, and I hear your auditors in the room, so I got to be careful what I say. But
he is, yeah.
Okay, man.
Waiting for the FedEx guy to drop off a package.
Yeah, it's good. But I do think, looking back on what you've done and finding the things you could have done better, finding the things that you did well, and succeeding and driving that forward for looking forward is a great call out from Robin. So.
I love the tie into OKRs too, because we live by OKRs here at Pax8. So I haven't actually gone in and looked at the security OKRs, but by your description, I'll bet they're pretty solid.
They're decent for sure. Today we wanted to talk about answering that question as someone saying, well, how can I be better next year? How can I get started in security? What do I need to do? I'm told I need to be CMMC. What do we need to do to demystify that? And so one of the questions I wanted to pose was with a good friend of mine and yours, Shel Philips. Can we bring Sheldon on, please, Danielle? There he is, through the magic of internet. Sheldon, welcome to the party, buddy.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Very good. One of the questions. So Sheldon, just as a backstory, Sheldon, why don't you tell everybody about your background? You do share a commonality with Robin in the sense that you're also from a project management perspective. But introduce yourself for everybody that doesn't know you yet, there, Shel.
I will do that. So for the last 45 plus years, I've been doing project management, technical project management, implementing, ERPs and that sort of thing. So it's really been from a project management. I am a PMP. And so from a project management background, that's how I come to the environment. About 20 years ago, I got involved in IT support, and I've been in sort of the MSP game now for the last 20 or so years. And then the last 5 years, I've really been focused on security. We started with HIPAA, then we went to CIS and PCI DSS, and we finally ended up now with CMMC.
Well, you have unfortunately stepped in a hornet's nest right now, Shel, because we on this show have a policy where if you're going to use an acronym, you have to define it. So let's start off with HIPAA. Let's go with that. Let's get going.
The hell? Oh gosh, really?
Isn't it Health Insurance Information Portability Act? HIPAA.
No, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act.
And Accountability Act.
HIPAA. Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Good save, Dom.
CIS is the Criminal Justice Information System.
I could have taken that one. I feel
PCI
terrible.
Is pay card data
industry,
whatever it is.
I think it's the payment card industry, PCI
Data security standard.
Data security standard. Yep. And CMMC is Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. So I think
very good. Okay, sorry, we had to have that segue. It's real tough when you use acronyms on this show. It adds 3 minutes. So let's keep going though, bud. Sorry, back to your introduction.
So, and I want to make a couple distinctions before we get started. The two guys sitting here on the screen, Dom and Matt, there's two pieces to cybersecurity. There's security and there's compliance. And these two guys would be frontline security. They know all the acronyms and all the tools and all the stuff to actually fight hackers. I am the compliance side, which is, are we following the rules that we've set down? Are we, I'm the strategist, if you will. Here's the fence post. Here's the farmer's field. I'm not going to tell you exactly how to plow the field, but I'm going to set the boundaries on what needs to be secure, what sort of crop should go in each field, and so on. And with a project management background, that gives me the ability to sort of document our approach and to have a more strategic look at what's really going to happen. So that distinction is one that needs to be made. The second one, and we're going to talk about, I think, getting in, how do we dive into the pool of cybersecurity? And I would say, all of the big memes apply. One way to eat an elephant, one bite at a time. All of those things. I would liken it for an MSP, for a managed service provider to actually implement a security framework. It's more like changing a flat tire on a vehicle doing 60 miles an hour. Okay? Think about that for just a second. You're traveling along and you have to somehow fix that flat tire. And I saw it back in the 50s. There was a TV show called You Asked For It, and they actually did it. They had a framework that popped down a little extra wheel. They took the wheel off. They changed it without stopping. Well, that's kind of what an MSP, because of the legacy systems and tool sets they've brought on, that's what it would be like. But there is a methodology that I use when I'm consulting, and I think maybe we can get into that today.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, and just to give some additional color, Sheldon and I have gotten to be real close friends over the last 3 years, even if we are a bit polar opposite. But we co-teach a course together on policy that Sheldon twice or three times a year has gotten together with me to teach policy creation centered on CIS, which is what kind of sparked this whole conversation of, further and further as we continue down this path, The government is trying to regulate. The insurance companies are trying to regulate. The banks will soon be part of that fold. You'll start seeing preferential pricing. You'll start seeing loans where you have to have a contingency of having security policies. And so you're on the early throes of a system as a whole trying to rectify a giant cancer, right? Cybersecurity loss at the $7 trillion mark, with 99% of the businesses in the United States being SMBs. 43% of our gross domestic production comes from SMBs. That you'll start seeing more and more regulations and forces existing where we're going to have a healthy cybersecurity and compliance program. And when I talk about security, I usually think of it as a holistic measure of both of those, in the sense that if it's not written down and you're not following it, it didn't happen, right? Security is right now about reasonability and due care. And when you start thinking about those things, you can't be reasonable if you haven't followed what you said you were going to do, or even defined what you're going to do. And policy is the outside of that. The challenge I think that people face, and that what I wanted to tackle today, is MSPs are jumping into it with this trivial belief that they'll meet very heavy, strict standards like a CMMC, right? 800-171 when self-audited, or others, right? And as that continues to get more and more stringent on what it needs to be there, there's a giant gap between what they believe is security and compliance and what it really is. Dom, how many times have you looked at me and said, man, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, right? From what the
A lot.
risk and the,
Yeah,
a lot. So
and
where
that's
can
part
they
of
start?
cybersecurity,
Sheldon?
is saying, oh, I'm just like, sometimes saying no is, I do this in my day job at running pro services. Sometimes we get asked to do something and we have to say no because the risk that I put my team in is too high, right? And
Yep.
it is what it is.
So how can people start in security? And what you and I posed together in this context, Shel, was that CIS is a great way to start your compliance program, right? And that it's not an audited framework. There is no real guidance there other than some very pragmatic, security focused things. But they have crossover, right? In fact, you did a crossover of all the 800-171 and CMMC goals and practices into the controls and subcontrols of CIS, and have just recently written a complete policy guide for a CIS-centric policy. So you were the subject matter expert I figure I needed on this show to have that conversation. So why don't we start with the premise, Sheldon? What was your assertion when you and I were teaching that class of where CIS started?
Well, as a project manager, I typically sort of start strategically with finding a trusted advisor. That's the very first place to start. Get either a peer that you trust that's been through it, find a peer group that's been through it, pay for a consultant to help you, or even a group like Pax8 has specialists who know how to do these sorts of things. So starting there is just a number one place to start. The second thing then, when I'm implementing a CIS 18, for example, I'll sit down with the client and I'll have a strategic conversation, a discussion. I'm going to talk about business goals. I'm going to talk about strategy goals. What's protected? What are you trying to secure? Which platform and tools are you using or wish to use? And then I talk about roles of individuals, both in the business and in the security play, the security side. So who's the security officer? Who's the network manager that's going to make the changes? Who's the team or the change accountability board that's going to review the changes and authorize them, and so on. So I have that conversation, that strategic conversation first. Then I choose a framework, and typically it depends on which industry the MSP is servicing, or our clients even are servicing. And typically, if they're not in the Department of Defense industrial base dealing there, a CIS 18 is a great place to start. There's a couple of reasons why I think a framework is really important, and implementing it with an MSP, managed service provider, is one, they need to protect themselves. That's one. It's a biggie, and it's a very, very important point. But the second thing is if you've gone through the process, you can now take a client through the process, and that is revenue. That is revenue that you can, at a very high gross margin, and you can go through and do that consulting and you become an expert because you've been down the path. Okay, so that's the reason why you should actually follow a framework. Now, the whole idea of CIS 18 is that it is a layered strategy. In other words, there's 3 implementation groups to go through. There are 18 controls that sort of equate to domains in other frameworks. They're
Yep.
categories of activity, and they break out to 153 safeguards. 153 things to do, and those things layer on in these implementation groups 1 through 3. So so then the fourth thing that I do is break down the work breakdown structure, and project managers know what that is. It's packets of work to be done. Well, the framework itself kind of does that. It's suggested by each of the controls that are in the CIS 18. But unlike the way that the CIS 18 is numbered and ordered, I take a different approach. It's like taking a tree down in your neighborhood. There's a fence there, there's a shed, there's bushes. You can't just drop that tree down and cut it up. You have to actually think about how you're going to do it. You usually go up the tree, take off the low-hanging limbs or fruit, get up to the top, and then start taking the pieces down. Same approach with coming at CIS 18. There are some good places to start that are easier to implement than others. Okay.
And
so
I want to let you continue down this path, but I want to
Yeah.
add one more piece of context. So we talked
Yeah.
about CIS as being these implementation groups, and then they certainly build upon themselves. But if you've ever played video games where you're playing like role-playing games, throughout the beginning of the character's progression, you're unlocking new domains, right? You're now saying, all right, cool, you've mastered throwing that little throwing star. Let's now add this ability to jump, right? Or this ability to roll. And as you see those go, even after you get all those abilities, that's kind of the joy of the game, is you're now stacking on capabilities on top of those abilities. So now I already have this ability, but I'm only a level 2 at it. And I need to be a level 70 at it to be effective in this one space I'm fighting in, or the next thing I'm trying to go to. So if you think about CIS, the first 2 pieces are the IGs. Getting through each of those 153 safeguards is like getting character progression to a point that you have all the skills. But then the rest of it that people miss often is that it's meant to be an iterative process too. And CIS is meant to start where you are. And as you take a control that says have EDR, it needs to improve in even its capability. It needs to go to level 70 on your EDR. And so a lot of people think of this as one and done, but it really is get through it all once. That's just the start. Now you've got to continue to iterate on each of those attributes, and you need to enhance them in separate capabilities. And so I like to equate CIS to a role-playing game, so I don't sound as nerdy, or at least I'm more accepted in nerdiness. But yeah, the point I wanted to add was that CIS is meant to start and get done, and then really improve over time too. So, but back to your
Right.
point on getting started. So I
Right,
apologize.
right. And so an illustration of sort of that layering effect is I start with number 5, control 5, account management. So
Right.
it's Active Directory, basically. Start with an inventory of accounts. Use passwords. Again, each layer. Use unique passwords. Disable dominant account or dormant accounts. Restrict administrative privileges. Establish and maintain inventory. Centralize it. Each one of those safeguards layers on an additional piece. Then I next go to access control management, which is about MFA. It's about sort of security groups, that sort of thing. And you see, as you layer those on, each of those can be refined. But as you go through that, one of the steps in actually accomplishing and checking those off is you have to clean house. Your Active Directory probably has dormant accounts, has accounts that service accounts, let's say for the HVAC, whatever. You have to go through each one of
Target
those and
breach.
determine. Yeah, you have to determine if they're really valid and so on. So that's where I start, and I've got a whole list of all 18 resorted in an order that sort of makes sense and can actually be attacked. The actual numbering of CIS 18, 1 through 18, it starts with inventories, hardware, software, that sort of thing. And sometimes, if you think about it, there's one step That's file inventory. Are you kidding me? How many times have you run the tree command in DOS? You can't even get it all because it's layered so deeply. And then to list the hundreds of thousands of files, that's not the point of it. The point is, what protected information files do I need to deal with? Where do they go? What's that structure look like? And frequently, I'll take a person to a place where, okay, let's take your most important and secret stuff and put it up into the cloud in a new SharePoint structure or whatever it might be, a new folder structure, put the securities on it, and then grow from there, move stuff in, categorize it, and so on and so forth.
So that's a cool, I don't want to miss that point of this concept. This is, I think, a nugget out of the show, right? So your conversation was, I've got all of this that I could try to boil the ocean on, all the data, all the different places that exist, all the existing infrastructure, or you could define your enclave, right? You could define where you're placing the data, and it's going to have all these security controls. And now you can say, you know what? I'm going to move sensitive, make you feel goody type stuff that matters to you into this new location that has all the protections. And we'll start assuming by that segmentation that everything in the other bucket needs to be the non-secured data, or needs to go away, or needs to have a retention policy applied that includes deletion, right? And things like that. So Dom, when you're doing projects, does this resonate with how you approach some of these implementations, or you would approach them in the DomKirby professional services hat? In your mind of what Shel's talking about
100%.
there?
I think I want to preface this because this is Pax8 Media, and that we're very limited in what security work will do for you in professional services. But when we're advising, we're generally trying to get our partners to take the riskiest stuff, right? So in healthcare, that's patient data is one of the most common examples we run into, and deal with that. And almost every time, in fact, I would probably go so far as to say every time, there's patient data somewhere it's not supposed to be. Right, it's somewhere silly. One case they found it in the physical world, all over unlocked file cabinets, conference room tables, but it's typically like user desktops and all this other stuff. And the
downloads folder.
And the first piece of advice is great. You have to standardize where anything PII goes, and then you start to get to use like Purview to mark that data, and maybe even mark that data in an automated fashion. So that's kind of step one for us is, what's the riskiest thing that would cause the biggest impact if it went wrong right now?
Yep.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times Matt in other conversations has said, I could take a new startup, put them in the cloud in an infrastructure that's all secure and protected, and get them up and operating and profitable much more quickly than somebody who has a legacy system, whether it's on premises or in their colo, their data center, a local data center, whatever. And that's absolutely true because you don't have to deal with all of that historic legacy stuff. And so,
and you're kind of creating a hybrid, right? Where you're landing in the middle somewhere. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So I go there, and then malware, backup, email. There's just kind of an order of approach that I take. In fact, I had a customer the other day, I was going through the CMMC strategy, and he says, I had a consultant before try to help me through this, and he says, I like your approach because you've broken it down into doable pieces and you've started in logical places. High praise. I really appreciated it, but it's because of that strategic approach that you can successfully do this. It takes us, when we get a new client, let's say it's CMMC, it takes us about 6 weeks to harden, to put an infrastructure in place, harden it, migrate their data and that sort of thing, and get a starting point. That's about 65% of CMMC's controls, is sort of the technical side. And then it takes me about 4 to 6 weeks to get their policy manual in place and get them on a routine of starting the procedural things that have to happen, the other 35% to go. So it takes a good probably 3 or 4 months to get somebody into that place. But the reason that is, it took Covenant, my company, like a year and a half to start from scratch on a CMMC project, because we had to write the manual from scratch. We had to change it because CMMC requirements changed from 1.0 to 2.0.
No.
You know, who would have thunk it? And then we had to do all of that stuff from scratch without a strategy. So now that's why it's so beneficial for us to have gone through this process, is because we have a methodology to do it quickly and efficiently.
Yeah. And I think as you dig into this, trying to get started somewhere and where to go, you represent a very mature contingency of this, right? You've done this, you've been through it, you've thought through it quite a bit, you've worked with industry leaders and some of the same companies I've hired, we've collaborated with in the past. But when someone's starting, they don't have any of that, and even to your extent, I think started with a leg up in a lot of ways in how you started with what your background is and where you were coming from. But how would you recommend if someone was starting with CIS? And I'm a little bit giving this away, for anybody that's watching, we'll put Sheldon's contact information. He actually does service other MSPs. You partner with and become a trusted advisor for other MSPs, and they've written a CIS centric policy manual that they do obviously want to live the American dream and make profit on, but they have developed a really cool version 1.0 of that to get you started as an MSP, and you should look up Sheldon if you're wanting to go down that. But aside from that, if I was your MSP consulting client and I've hired you to help me get started in developing a cybersecurity program, developing a CIS-centered compliance program, and for people at home, it's this. When you're starting to talk about compliance, it's all about evidence and artifacts. If you have a policy that says, I'm going to have Sheldon walk out to the mailbox, open the mailbox, and look at it and describe its status of what was in the mailbox once a day at 8 a.m., you need to be able to show a log that shows Sheldon walking his happy self out to the mailbox, writing on the mailbox that he's checked it, filling out the database entry with a timestamp that shows it, that I can then collect and hand over to an auditor, proving the mailbox has been checked every day at 8 a.m.
Really love this example. I'm imagining it happening right now with an access log.
It's so good, right? I'm
Yeah.
an analogy engine. But you have this access log, right? And that's exactly what I'm describing, is accessing that mailbox and saying, yes, I checked it, or I did this. And so I think the point is when we start thinking about getting in place,
hold
you
on.
have to have several things.
Quick segue.
Go ahead.
So your analogy spurred me. If you really want to see like the most precise example I've ever seen of a procedure for this, the DNS root keys get signed. This is literally like the key for dot in DNSSEC, like all the things. They sign that quarterly, and you can actually go watch it. And they have what they call a script, and they have acts in this script, and they document every single step that they're going to take. Now, I'm not telling you to get that detailed, but it's a good concept of organizations that need to take that to the extreme, such as the one responsible for proving that everything on the internet exists, is actually really fun. So it's called the key signing ceremony. You should definitely, it's on YouTube. It's a weird one to watch if you're a nerd.
Just taking 6 minutes of my life from me, Dom, because I'm going to go watch it. But the point is
it's 3 hours long each time.
Oh, good God. Thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But as you think about it, we see these corollaries in highly sensitive things. Airplane mechanics have a very detailed log. But as we go back to this conversation, you have to have several components. You have to have a Sheldon. You have to have him defined as the person that's going to do it. You have to have the process by which he's going to go do it, to your point of your 3-hour key signing certificate process ceremony. And then you have to have the evidence gathering capabilities defined. And so when you start talking about what makes a healthy security and compliance program, they have to be both hand in hand. And so for Sheldon's question of I'm an MSP coming to him, we're assuming I don't have anything. I have a couple tools I use. I have things like that. Sheldon, how do you have that advisory session, that first one with someone about starting down that path where you can gather that evidence and have the Sheldon to walk to the box?
That's a great question. And the funny thing is frequently it's the business owner that's coming and saying, okay, I'm the security officer. All right, time out. Let's start over, okay? You are the biggest target in your business for hackers to try to get your credentials and go after. You should not be the guy with admin rights to do all of these corrections and changes. And I encourage them, and in lieu of having their own designated security officer, we don't do this, but at least for temporarily through the process, I act as their security officer temporarily, but we don't do it as a contract basis because it doesn't leverage very well. But everybody, and that's the roles conversation that we have. We talk about who's going to be sort of the project manager, the security officer for this organization, who's going to be responsible to get all these things to happen. Now, I don't do technical changes in our network. I'm the security officer, but I don't make those changes. I have a designated person, a network manager, who actually makes approved changes. Okay, so again, now you begin to see the segmentation of responsibility,
Yep.
because that's best practice and it's called out in the framework to
Are
split
you
the
familiar with the
responsibility.
RACI responsibility index?
Yeah, yeah,
Good, because I just wrote one question for zero trust training for CSA. My first exam question is based on RACI and the understanding of responsibility, accountability, consulted, and then informed for that
informed, right,
perspective. So, yeah,
right.
good call.
It's an old project manager terminology. But to get the responsibility matrix of who's going to do what to whom and how and why, and that's actually built into the templates that the system security policy manuals, the SSPs or plans that we put together. Who does what
Sheldon
and
gets a
why?
point for predefining a acronym. That's not often that happens, but Shell just went first with the definition, then followed with the acronym in true PMP style, right? Like,
Thank you, thank you. I do that in all my writing too. The acronym comes in parentheses after you state what it is.
yeah, I love it. I love it. It's so
It's
Sheldon.
a common practice around here.
So you've
Anyway,
got the
we have that.
responsibilities sorted out first, and you now
Yeah,
have a designated head of this for my organization. What do I
right.
do next, Shell? How do I get started?
Well, again, using a template or some sort of checklist. Now, in CMMC, there is what's called a SPURS self assessment scorecard. If I have to look up I forget what SPURS is.
I'm
I
looking up
think
SPURS for you, SPRS, but I don't remember what it
Service
stands for. I got it.
Provider Risk System, I think
Risk
is what
system. Yeah, you nailed it on the
Yep.
nose.
I thought it was
So,
Supplier Performance Risk System.
okay.
Oh, you're
That,
right.
that,
You're right.
that- that's closer, yeah. So this checklist actually goes through and gives points for meeting the 110 controls. And I've developed actually something like that for the CIS 18, which actually has a check off as you complete them. For the first pass through, you can put dates and times when you've completed them and use that as a guideline for how to attack these things. And
Did you
so we
assign
go
points
through.
correlative to the point structure of SPURS?
No,
Or did you
not
shoot
yet.
from the hip? Okay.
Not
I was like, man,
I
that is
didn't.
fancy right there, brother. Good God. You're like, well, this maps across to this IAM control in practice.
Yeah.
And therefore, this
Right.
SPURS impact would be. I was
That's
like, wow,
probably in
man.
version. That's probably version 2, Matt. Probably version 2.
That's what I love about you, buddy. I know it's always on the horizon for improvement.
It's always on the roadmap somewhere. Yeah. So anyway, so I literally go through that process. When I'm doing CMMC, I have my technicians. I have one session where the technicians go through and answer the questions from a technical standpoint. Do we have all the technical pieces in place? Are they configured properly and so on? And we go through that list. Then I go back through procedurally with my client, and we actually do all, like, for example, risk assessment, all the awareness training, check those off because we put that together. And usually we do the hardening first. We get the platform, the hardening, and then we do the documentation of the process.
So, Shel, you've been challenged in the audience about this acronym. So, PMP stands for Project Management Professional. But what is PMBOK? PMBOK.
PMBOK?
I've looked it up. Somebody
Yeah,
cheated.
that's the project manager. What is it? Something of
Got it.
knowledge.
Nailed it.
Body of knowledge. Yeah.
Body of knowledge.
100%. Yeah, it's so good. Thanks for the call out,
Yeah.
and it's good to see you over here. But
My
yeah, it's
buddies.
awesome. Where's Covenant out of? Covenant's out of Oregon.
Portland,
in
Oregon.
the
Yep.
Willamette Valley, or Willamette
Willamette.
Valley.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, it's very nice. Very nice.
Portland,
Sorry. Good job,
Oregon.
John
We are-
Carlisle. Good to see you.
Yeah, we are nationwide. We have clients across the country. We are an MSP. We started 22 years ago doing MSP. About 7 years ago, we were, we'd do the backup, antivirus, firewall, level 3 configuration, and that was the security program. That was it. And then we got involved with
And I'll call
client.
that out, Shel.
Yeah,
That's the way everybody did it, right? It was
yeah,
just, what did I
yeah,
think I needed? It was like
yeah,
genuinely just at least maybe I'm telling on myself, I was the smart guy and I knew I needed EDR
right.
and I knew that Webroot wasn't
Yep,
going to cut it for me this now. And I need to do that. And
yep,
maybe I need to do
yep,
this. And like, those were
yep,
all just hip shots. Those were all me being
yeah,
arrogant. And now a framework, and
yeah,
I think that's where your story's heading, gave you perspective on what that body really was, from a body of knowledge of
exactly,
security, and from that
exactly,
applicability. But yeah,
exactly.
continue.
That's
Sorry.
absolutely right. So 5 years ago, we got involved with a client, a healthcare client that was going for high tech certification. And since we were a business advisor, BA, we had to comply as well. There you go again. We had to comply. And so that means we had to have a manual, we had to have the processes and so on and so forth for HIPAA. And then next we said we had a client that had the CJIS system, the Criminal Justice Information Services system, and we had to know about that to help them. And so we actually got all of our techs are level 4 CJIS certified, so we can actually work on those systems for our clients. And then that led us to, we had an ITAR compliant, that's the International Trade in Arms.
That's how I
International
first
Trafficking and Arms
traffic and
Regulation.
arms regulation.
Yeah,
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 and that's how I first met the State Department. Ironically, so
Oh, you got
was
to chat with
vis-a-vis an ITAR
DDTC about that
violation.
one, huh?
Yeah,
yeah.
that was a blast.
Yeah.
That was a blast.
They're
So
real
we-
nice. Yeah.
So we had an
Yeah.
ITAR, a manufacturer that made gun parts, and they were purchased by a very big firm out of the East, and that
Yep.
firm required that their MSP be certified in NIST 800-171. Well, we were not that
That
yet.
sent you down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. So my boss said, okay, we're going to become that. So that was where I
So
really
checked
got
the
it.
box first and said, yes, we're that, and then started building it, or never mind.
No,
Tease.
no, we lost the
Don't put him
client
in that
because
spot.
we
Come on
weren't.
now.
We lost the
I was
client
trying to be
because
that
we
guy.
were not. And so that's how we actually got into the CMMC space.
We've never
And-
talked about this, Shel, but that was my same origin. Essentially, I
Was
had
it?
a MSP. I had a client of ours, and that was part of ITAR, vis-a-vis being bought by a company that worked on missile parts.
Right.
And then the second one was an 800-171 client that was going through a rate readiness review with Boeing, I think it was, or maybe it was a Spirit. But either way, it really dawned on us of how many things we had to say no to, and how quickly, like, we're close to 800-171 because of this company that you pay every month. And it's like, oh my God, what do we
Right.
have to do? What do we do?
Right.
And so I got thrust down that same rabbit hole in a similar fashion about 2017.
As you know, 3 years ago, then Pax8 got interested in the CMMC thing. It was really coming on, and started a peer group, if you will, a community,
An ad hoc
around
group
that.
of us idiots, right? Myself
And
included.
that's where we met and got involved. And my boss says, hey, there's a market here, let's go for it. And so that's kind of the rest of the story, how we got actually into this whole thing. But back to CIS 18, it is a very good layered approach to CMMC. In other words, if you implement it, probably even through implementation group 2, then the next hop to the CMMC is probably the next easiest step. There's a couple of go ahead.
So in the CIS, part of that is, here, let's get somebody to walk to the mailbox. Let's describe who it should be. And when you move over to CMMC, there's a corresponding control about the mailbox, right? Like it's kind of in that same allegory.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, very good. So it's not wasted effort, is your point.
Yeah. The difference between CMMC and CIS 18 is CIS 18 is a lot more layered. There's 153 safeguards. There's only 110 controls in CMMC. So instead of layering on, let's say, user authentication, they might say one control is have a methodology for authenticating and approving, access, kind of a thing. And it'll assume all the layers that CIS 18 explodes out into. And so,
which is kind of what I love about it, right? Because if you look at NIST controls, a lot of them are super scientific because it's NIST, and I use the
Right.
joke that they're the reason we know what time it is, right? So they don't just do this. But I love that CIS takes that concept that NIST says manage authentication and authorization and brings it down into 10 more bullet points. I mean, isn't, but,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that being able to walk through that is so huge, especially with an inexperienced business owner. It's a
Right.
really powerful tool.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And that's why I said it's such a good setup for CMMC transition. The level one of CMMC is 17 of the 110 controls, and 4 of them are about physical security, like visitor sign
Locks
in
on your door,
and
sign in log.
locked
Yeah.
doors. Yeah, that kind of thing. So they aren't really even technically sort of technical.
Which
based.
is kind of a gap on CIS, right? It doesn't really focus on the physical security and hardness. And in the same fashion, CMMC doesn't focus as much on supply chain risk, right? And some of those extensibilities.
Well,
So
more specifically, the one that I think is most intriguing is CIS focuses on vendor vetting and management, whereas CMC does not. It doesn't really talk
Right.
about vendor service providers at all. And so I think there's about 3 places where the two don't match up directly. And so that's where you have to do a little extra work.
but it does show the maturity model of if you're wanting to start somewhere before you have a lens and a scope on you, such as CMMC or something that's an audited framework, starting with CIS and building the muscles, right? When you start to play football, you go do drills where you just roll over the other dude. You go do drills where you just sprint down the field. You do those things that build the muscles so that you can put them all together to then have a concert to create the blocking and tackling that need to exist, right? And so I think to your point of starting with CIS and getting the mailbox route walked down and getting that person to do it every day and getting the muscles flexed of having a defined process and updating it when Shel decides he doesn't want to walk out there when it's snowing, or right, making these changes that need to exist in a process happen better in an unmonitored world as a starting point to then work yourself towards the scrutiny and things that you're going to need for more scrutinous
Well, just one
frameworks
thing to
such as
point out
CMMC.
on that note too, even if CMMC isn't your end game, because that's not, maybe that's not the space you work in.
Right.
CIS crosswalks to just about any other cybersecurity framework out there. In fact, if you go to cisecurity.org, they've done a lot of this work. They'll cross map it to NIST CSF. There's references to HIPAA security rule in there. I think they've added the Australian, was it the top 8? What is theirs? Is it top 8?
Yeah, Elite 8 and then the Elite or
Elite,
the Essential 8 and the Essential 8
There it is.
expanded is also now available.
Yeah.
Essential 8.
So CI Security is also doing this work. They're not doing CMMC and more power to them. But my point is you could take CIS and apply it to a lot of different things if you need to.
Yep. I did a Venn diagram once of all the frameworks, and you see that NIST covered almost 90% of all of the rest of them. We now CIS 18 covers probably 95 to 98% of all of them. I mean, it's really good foundation, and that I think that's why you guys, Pax8, have adopted that, because it is such broad and so approachable. It's such a good way to move into security.
Yeah, Phyllis Lee and team do such a good job over there. Not my relation, but a lot of the people at CI Security are former 3 letters involved in our federal government's security and information
their community too.
So.
Is you can't forget. So they have this whole program called Workbench, and they put out benchmarks, not benchmarks.
Yeah,
I'm forgetting the term, but it's documents that vendors, community members participate in, and so Microsoft has one for Microsoft 365, for example, and it is a walk down signed off on by Microsoft right through how to make your tenant CIS aligned, not compliant. It's not compliance framework, CIS aligned.
Right.
So it's powerful. We're starting to get involved in these collaborations where we're putting input in and we're taking input from people like Shel and all over the place. So that for me is why I really like CIS, is they're so community centric.
It's true.
You can literally go sign up and start adding thoughts to projects right now.
And I do love that we're talking about CIS V8. I've only been around since CIS V7 days, so this is not a brand new project, right? This has been ongoing for quite a while, but it's just now gaining the massive adoption across the board. But I think the point is, I want to leave them with, is if you don't think you know how to do it, reach out and get these answers. Come to a CIS class with with myself at Pax8. Come take a policy class with Sheldon. And if you're really ready to dig in and dive in, I would have never gotten where I was at without paying a Neil initiative, who's the company that I consulted with when I was first trying to figure this out. And in similar fashion, and Neil didn't necessarily understand the MSP community in the same way, where you can find partners, you can find peer groups, you can find Sheldons and covenants, and have them help you get a giant jumping stone forward on implementing a CIS strategy inside your organization and eventually delivering that to your end customers. But Dom, let's go ahead and close it out. Sheldon, thank you so dang much for being here. I love you every time I get to see you, and the world's a better place for you being in
Yeah.
it. So Dom, let's close this out, buddy.
Thanks so much for your time. Love any airtime I can get with Shel.
Yep.
That's our show for today. We hope to have you with us next week. We have Gerald from NordPass and Nord Security. He's going to be joining us. We're going to talk about password management. There's some epic graphics to be had in that episode, so you really don't
I drew
wanna
them
miss
myself. Very nice.
Matt drew them
Yes,
himself.
yes.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
And they include sheep. Oh, yeah.
They do include sheep. So with that in mind, join us next week. Don't forget to catch Technically Unraveled Thursdays at 2 p.m. Mountain. They've just wrapped up their second episode. Chris and Fahrenbach.
It's our much better show by better people at Pax8 that are crushing it. It was amazing. I actually got to catch it. It was fantastic.
It was really good. Yeah. With that in mind, do all the things like subscribe, share, all the algorithmic things, and we will catch you next week here on the game.